I hope everybody's had a decent morning. Everybody done rounding for the day? Just do a few things and then go home? No? No? There's some stuff that's lingering behind, right? There's some batches that are still in your pocket, fair to say? Yep. Lists, work lists, check boxes, all that good stuff. Wow, right? That sounds like a fun afternoon. It's a constant game of playing catch up, isn't it? Yeah, you start the day, you hit the ground running, go see all your patients, then you go see them again, and you might go see them again, and you talk about stuff, and you create lists of to-dos, and you do some of them, but then a lot of them have to wait till later because that's when you have time. And then the people who receive those orders and all those requests get big batches of work hitting their inboxes all later in the day, and they're scrambling to play catch up so that they can get all the stuff that you want before you are closing the office for the evening or whatever. Yeah. It's kind of nuts, right? It's kind of nuts. Has anybody ever worked in another industry? Did y'all go right through college, medical school, and into medicine? Okay, I see some no's back there. Give me an example of some other things people have done. Come on, people! You're so far away, I can barely see you. Tutoring? Okay, cool. Any others? Social work? Okay. I'm sorry? School teaching. Okay. Tutoring, teaching. We have a couple of teachers. All right. So in teaching, we're tutoring. I'm going to ask you some questions. Did you tutor one student at a time or just tutor multiple? Three at a time? And did you basically just teach all three and they all moved along at exactly the same pace and they all got the information the same way? Or did you have to customize it?
They're all different ages.
Different ages. Okay, so different curriculum. So very customized. Now, would you start with one sort of half finished and then jump to the next, or did you stick with one until they seemed to have what they needed to do some work and then move to the next? How did you do that?
I mean, usually like the other ones would be working on their work and just help the one that's struggling.
Okay.
They kind of like go back and forth with things.
So you had a kind of awareness of which kids needed help, and you'd focus on them until they got what they needed, and then you'd move on. Okay. Well, that's kind of cool because you basically looked at each student as an individual and you dealt with their needs as they came up, right, in real time, as opposed to saying, okay, I want everybody to work all morning and I want you to capture all the things that you're struggling with and you're going to tell me at noon and then I'm going to teach you all that stuff after that. You guys all sit in front of me and I'll teach you everything you need to know based on what you struggled with. See, you didn't create a batch, you dealt with it in real time as it came up. And that's a general concept, right? So I want to introduce the concept of lean in healthcare. Okay, who's worked with lean in the past? Anybody have any experience with lean? Nobody. Okay, all right. That's not unusual, especially in our industry. I'm here with Sonia Reed. She is a senior process improvement leader in our organization. She has a team of folks who help us with projects and actually guide us and coach us. She's with me today to kind of give you a little bit deeper dive into one aspect of lean, and that'll be the second half of today's talk. I'm going to talk about more general things to describe what lean is and hopefully bring it around to what you do in a way that makes sense. You are invited at any point to interrupt me if something isn't making sense. Otherwise, that's a batch that goes unmanaged or a need that goes unmanaged. So please step in. Just some general definitions that hopefully will help us. And welcome also to the other sites that are listening in and watching this remotely. One housekeeping thing, when we get to questions and answers, later, I'm going to ask you guys to use the microphone so that our friends around the city can hear what you're saying as well. Okay? Deal? All right. So these are the definitions. I'll kind of read them at you. So think of lean as a method for improving the performance and results of what you do by removing waste. The emphasis on waste is critical to understanding lean and lean thinking. Okay? It isn't purely built on cost. If you think only cost, you're not getting it. It's about waste. And sometimes there are costs that go into creating better processes that reduce waste. Okay, so it's not necessarily always going to play out with lower costs immediately. Ultimately, you can do the same things typically for less. You do that through waste reduction and through standardization. Once you light on a way that is better, has less waste, you try to make it the way you do it. Does that make sense? As opposed to doing lots of different things that have different amounts of waste. The method of streamlining processes to reduce cost, certainly cost matters to every organization. We want to improve quality and patient safety, and again, all through waste reduction. Lean focuses on what the customer values. Who is your customer? People in healthcare have been squeamish about calling patients customers. But in this world, they can choose. They can look up which hospital they want to go to. They can look up how this doctor is liked opposed to that doctor. Believe me, it is a customer-focused industry. And it's probably helping us become better at what we do. Because we're now not only more interested in listening to those voices, but in some ways we're almost forced to listen to those voices because it's now bundled up in payment structures. So whether you agree or disagree with that particular approach, it's there today. And so if we're not listening to the voices of customers, we are actually putting a lot of risk into a system. We also want to foster a culture in which everyone's voice matters. So it's not just the voice of customers, it's the voice of the people who do the work. The greatest expertise that you're going to find in any task is going to be found in the group of people who do that task routinely. No matter how much you know or think you know, no matter how many degrees you have, no matter what your past experience, if you don't currently do that job routinely, you lack the expertise they have. And it doesn't mean that what they think is always best, but there's going to be a blending of what they think and do that can create the best standard work. And that standard work, again, is about providing what the customer values with a minimum of waste. Is that okay? Cool. It's nothing new. Even though it's newish to healthcare, this kind of thinking has been around for a very long time. Now, it's not just automation. So the Ford assembly plant was sort of built on standard work and some degree of automation, but that standard work was not necessarily built around the concept of waste reduction. It was kind of built on speed. It was built on creating enough of the same thing to satisfy demand at a lowest possible cost. That's how Henry Ford captured the market. Now, he famously said you can have any color Model T you want as long as it's black. So voice of customer really wasn't part of that. This was a very novel innovation. This took off because of its newness and because it provided something that people thought they wanted. And it was a clunky thing to manage, but it was best in class. Remember the iPod? Anybody around when the iPod first came out? I'm feeling really old. But that predated your iPhone by quite a bit, and it was novel because you could now carry around your music library in your pocket without having a lot of cassettes or CDs. That was cool. All it could do was play music. And it sold like hotcakes. So clearly there's opportunities for automation. However, in the context of lean, you had to find processes that reduced the amount of waste, wasted effort, wasted materials, wasted anything that you can think of. Why? There's this little thing that happened between 1913 and 1950 called World War II. That consumed resources to a degree that you and I cannot possibly imagine. In the United States, rationing was normative. You had ration tickets to get the things you needed. I'm talking about sugar. I'm talking about fuel. I'm talking about anything that required rubber. People recycled everything for the war effort. Most of the people who are familiar with mechanics, familiar with industrial production, were now in the military. They were training and being shipped overseas in unprecedented numbers. And these factories were still called on to create all of the materials necessary to fight the war. And they had to do it with people who'd never walked in a factory in their lives. They had to create something that made that possible. And what they created was something called job methods. And that's built into a total program that was led in Washington, D.C., that ultimately spawned what we now call lean. So while everyone kind of points to Toyota as sort of being the inventor of lean, that is not in fact the case. Most of what the Toyota plant learned and developed was based on the methods that were created here in the United States in order to develop a robust production system that could support the war effort. We just cast it aside when all of the troops came home, because by then we had built such an impressive industrial base that we didn't really have any pressure to be efficient. And we fell back into some old tendencies, and ultimately, you know what happened. Ultimately, the companies in Japan that adopted these methods, trying to rebuild their country, actually overtook us. And Toyota became the largest, most profitable auto company in the world. We're not alone. A lot of hospitals all over the nation and around the world are looking to lean methods to improve systems. Why? Because we're under intense cost pressure. We're under intense pressure from our customers to provide better results, to be transparent about what we do. So if you start hearing more about lean over the coming years, that's not an accident. And many of you will graduate and go into companies, you'll be employed by hospital systems that probably are engaging with lean in some way, shape, or form. Some of these companies have been at it for more than 2 decades. These are a few, and we're actually working with Virginia Mason as a coaching organization for our own. But there are others around the country that have had impressive results. These are just snapshots, sort of look at it as ROI, return on investment, for those efforts. The only reason I'm showing this to you is to validate that there are places around the country that have actually done this quite a bit and have had great results. So if you think again of lean as a way of cutting costs, you're not going to get very far. Lean is actually a collection of principles. Toyota actually has 14 operating principles of lean. I'm not going to run through those. But for our purposes, if you think of any effort, any organized effort, any business, it starts with its purpose. What is it there to do? Why does it exist? In our world, that's a focus on patients, a focus on their outcomes. We design our care around them, we tend to get it right. So that's our purpose. Now, if you guys don't see that in your everyday world, that's no surprise. Okay? Most of what is built in healthcare and what grew in healthcare over the last decades was built around what? Money? Making money. Lots of money. Medicine used to print money back in the day because we could charge anything we wanted at one point in time. What else? Are there any people that healthcare was built around mostly? Us. Healthcare was built around us. Our schedules, the things we wanted to do, the things we didn't want to do. And if you look at a lot of the challenges that we have in scheduling and other things today, it represents that. It's not unusual. And I'm not blaming anybody. This is just how it evolved. It really wasn't guided by customers very much. But other industries were forced to do that well ahead of healthcare. Their financial crises happened over the preceding decades. Or they had major safety crises. Imagine if you worked in the nuclear energy field around 3 Mile Island, when that happened. Or when Russia had a meltdown. People won't tolerate that. Airline industry, when planes go down. Submarines in the Navy, sinking for no apparent reason. Those kinds of things kill people in the hundreds all at once, and they make headlines. Why hasn't healthcare been under that pressure? And that's because we kill patients one at a time, as a general rule. But the data shows that in healthcare, 90 to 250,000 people a year die as a function of medical mistakes. So it isn't minor by any stretch. It just isn't headline worthy. So once you have your purpose clear, you have to go to think about what about our people and process makes that purpose possible. Say that 5 times fast. Process and people are integrated. The best way to do the work, designed by the people doing the work, informs how you train people to do the job. And if those things aren't intertwined continuously, you're always going to have people who don't know how to do the work, and you're going to have a lot of work that doesn't work. So the general concept of lean is to have a really strong focus on what you're about, make it measurable, design processes that reliably deliver it, and make sure your people have everything they need, knowledge, equipment, supplies, time, to reliably do it. That's at the heart of it. Those processes have to be as waste-free as possible. Otherwise, we're creating defects, things that you have to work and rework and rework. Plus, you're limiting your capacity to grow and evolve to meet the needs of your customer. So that's the heart and soul of what we're trying to accomplish when we say lean. Lean is built on a general concept of processes. And to simplify that concept, this is a very generic cartoon. And I've shown it in several things before. And those who've seen it, keep eating your lunch. The idea of creating something starts with an order, customer requests something, and ends with delivery. Does that make sense? So no matter how complicated it is, basically that's what's happening. So if you have material A that worker 1 has a job to turn it into material B by adding something, taking something away, shaping it, whatever it is they do, it turns it into material B that worker 2 then uses to create material C, and then worker 3 takes that material and creates the final product that goes to the customer. And if you can do that all without waste, you've made the happiest customer possible because they got what they wanted, and you've done it without waste. So your profit is the best. Does that make sense? Ideal world. What could possibly go wrong? Let's say worker 1 is new. Worker 1 takes material A and creates a version of material B. It ain't quite right. But that's not discovered. Worker 1 doesn't know any better. Worker 2 pulls on the B and recognizes a problem. Does this ever happen in your world? Do you ever get information or anything you use that just ain't quite in the form that you actually need it? What do you have to do? You have to fix it if you want what you do to work. That takes extra time and might be frustrating. Now you've created the perfect B with more effort, which goes on to ultimately satisfy the customer, but you've probably spoiled a bit of your margin. And you've created a frustrated worker 2. And if there's no relationship between worker 2 and worker 1, worker 1's going to happily go on creating oddball Bs. What if it's a material problem? Y'all ever face that? Even a little nod from the back of the room would be okay. So when you expect to find something that you usually use and you find there's something different, maybe the suppliers have decided on changing contracts and now you're getting something different and it isn't familiar, that can create some issues too. Maybe it's not even built right for what you need. That can pass all the way through the system and create all kinds of noise. You can't fix something that's supplied that's all you have. You just use it. It makes it all the way through, and maybe it delivers to the customer something that isn't quite exactly what they would have ordered. This can happen quite easily. A material that we create is an order, a medicine order, a medication order, right? That can pass all the way through all of the Swiss cheese slices in our defenses and reach the customer, right? But it's a material. Now that may create some real disastrous situations. An unhappy customer, but it also can create some conflict between the customer and you, which ultimately always costs a lot of money. There's another defect that's common, and that's when steps aren't connected. What I mean by this is if a customer is only ordering one, is there any reason to produce more than one of any of those elements that are needed to produce the product? The customer's only ordered one. But if you're trying to think of it from the efficiency of worker one might be under the pressure to produce as many B's from A's as possible. Because worker one is judged by how productive they are, regardless of the quantity ordered by customers. This happens all the time. We try to get ahead by creating a lot of something. Or we order a lot of something that we might someday use. That happens a lot in healthcare. And ultimately, you do have a satisfied customer, but again, at a higher cost. You have a lot of wasted material. So Lean really tries to focus on all of these kinds of things and many, many more examples. But I wanted to give you guys some common real-world healthcare examples of how waste kind of finds its way into systems, how it finds its way into your processes. Now, as you guys do your job, and you do your job routinely every single day, you're probably aware of those things because they create frustration for you. Or maybe they once did and you've just kind of gotten over it. But a good rule of thumb for people who are interested in finding waste is look for frustration. Wherever there's frustration, you'll find a waste. And if you can understand where that waste is coming from, you can eliminate frustration. So defining value is a big part of this too. Remember, we have a customer who's ordered something. Well, what is it they expect? And I'm not saying what is it they absolutely are wishful for. I don't think most people come to healthcare hoping that they're going to have free newspapers and their towels folded in cute little shapes on the bed and all that. They're not looking for a luxury experience at a five-star hotel. They're looking for some pretty basic things. Respect, information, communication, a sense of partnership, participation, and progress. They want to see that progress is being made. And you could probably go on and on. But if we don't have an understanding of what it is that they need and expect, it's hard to deliver it. Remember, we're trying to do transformative activities. We're taking a chief complaint and trying to turn it into a diagnosis, which then goes into becoming a treatment that hopefully results in improvement or cure. So everything we're doing is transforming a raw material into something else. And in our world, it's mostly information. Any defect in that chain of actions, if it's not immediately found and resolved, can create a lot of variation downstream. It can result in the thing that creates harm. You see, there's a lot of defects. There's a lot of errors in healthcare. It's a very human business. We make errors all the time, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But by creating systems that help us detect those errors and prevent them, we actually prevent harm from reaching patients. And that's why I think in healthcare we have such a deep need for this kind of thinking. I don't care if you call it lean. I don't care what you call it. It doesn't really matter. It's an attention to the wastes that create the defects that cause harm. It's providing the best you can with the resources on hand. So value added versus non-value added is a bit of a judgment call sometimes. But generally speaking, value added means that the transformation you made, the work you did, would be paid for by the customer. The customer would welcome paying for that. That's a general rule of thumb. Okay? 4 doctors going into the same room asking the same history over a 2-hour period of time, probably not something a customer will willingly pay for. They'd probably want to know that the first person got that history and got it right. That would be sort of ideal, right? So you can kind of detect where we have perhaps some non-value added work in our everyday. There are some things you can't get rid of. A lot of what we do in the EMR is waste. But because it's essential to some part of the process, it may be billing, for example, you're sort of almost forced to do it, right? It doesn't mean it's bad. If you can't get rid of it, you can't get rid of it. Maybe downstream there will be a different way of approaching it that you can get rid of that waste, that it will become unnecessary. But there's some things in what you do that are a little bit wasteful, but you can't get rid of it. It's still essential. There are other things, though, that are completely able to be eliminated once you've identified them. Sometimes it's just no more than how far you have to walk to get something. That can be fixed pretty easily in many cases. This is sort of a listing of types of waste that we look for. And they use the mnemonic downtime. There are others out there that people have used. But if you think of it in this paradigm, defects, basically anything that requires inspection is defect prone. That's why our medication orders go through several lines of inspection. The computer sort of inspects it to make sure it isn't kind of screwball, but the computer isn't that smart. Then a human being in the pharmacy looks at it and tries to detect if there's anything screwball about it. But it can pass through that filter. A medication arrives to the unit and a nurse inspects it. There's multiple filters, but you can see how much inspection that one transaction requires. That's a significant sign of waste. If you can harden perfect prescribing at the front end, you've eliminated a lot of effort. So that's an example. Overproduction, again, if you do the Chem 50 every morning, because that's what you do, that's a pretty good example of potential waste. And there are projects all over the country looking at whether or not daily labs even matter. So there's opportunities perhaps there. Waiting. That's our best sport in healthcare. How much space in this building is dedicated to waiting? Think about that. That's a lot of heating and cooling and cleaning and managing, all to create a monument for waiting. It's pretty impressive. Non-utilized talents. I think this is the most underestimated waste. It's the idea that you might actually have good ideas and that I should listen to you. Wow. That if you're struggling with a problem and people do that kind of work and you create solutions without their involvement, that is an intense form of waste. It is also very disrespectful. Transportation waste. We do this all the time. We move people and stuff all over the place, trying to get it to where it's needed, rather than moving perhaps or creating things that make that unnecessary. Look at all the patient movement that happens in our hallways every day. Inventory. Whole rooms dedicated to storing stuff that sometimes never gets used, sometimes expires. Thousands, millions of dollars of the organization's money tied up in stuff. Motion. You ever watch somebody working at a desk job and the printer's over here and the fax machine's over there and something else they use is over here and a copier's over there, and they're constantly just zigzagging around the room? Who designed that crazy place? Extra processing. This gets into that sort of, I've asked the same history for the third time. That's one example in healthcare. Now these things are so common, they're almost impossible to see. Did you hear what I just said? These things are so common, they're almost impossible to see. But once you start seeing them, I promise you it will drive you crazy unless you have the tools to do something about it. And then it becomes exciting. So finding the waste, I'm going to kind of close with this example, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sonia, okay? So let's just take the case of a child arriving in clinic at 9:30. Mom checks in for the 4-year-old well child check. This was rescheduled because it was canceled because the doctor actually had vacation scheduled at the same time as the clinic was scheduled. So they had to cancel the appointment so the doctor could have vacation. Registrar says she arrived an hour late. Mom thought the appointment was at 8:30 or 9:30, but according to the computer, it was at 8:30. So she's asked to wait so they can go back and check and see if the doctor will see the patient. 20 minutes pass. Mom is informed the doc is okay with seeing them. Registration step finds an insurance problem, so they spend some time fixing that. 10 minutes are required for the registration, and then they're asked to wait for the MA to arrive. 15 minutes later, MA arrives, takes vital signs, does weight height, then walks the child back to another hallway to do vision screen, then another room in another hallway to do hearing, and then back to the original exam room. And they're asked to wait, and in passing she says, it's kind of important not to arrive late to your appointments. 10 minutes pass, the physician enters, performs exam, provides guidance, enters orders for vaccinations, tells mom to take make an appointment for 5-year assessment a year from now. 13 minutes spent with the child and mom. And during that time, mom forgot to ask 2 questions that she brought with her because with all the time spent, she's worried about being able to pick up her other child. 15 minutes later, the LPN enters the room with syringes for immunizations, apologizing for the wait because he couldn't find the vaccine information sheet for one of the vaccines. Had to go to the printer to reprint it, found the printer had no paper, went to a supply room to get more paper where they stack dozens of reams of paper. Briefly mentions that he wonders why they don't stock the paper near the printer, like he'd suggested. And, of course, performs the injections, gives them their information, and releases them to go back and make that appointment for a year from now. That night, while the physician's documenting the record at home via the portal, she notes the documented vaccine expiration date was March 29th. It's April 5th. She sends an angry email to her practice manager, then calls mom to apologize, tell her to return for another dose of the vaccine in a month so it will count for school. And in the process, she forgets to document a swollen lymph node that she found during the exam. Now, if you add up all those minutes, that alone would be startling, but that's actually not that unrealistic in the world we have. If you add up the number of defects and other wastes that occurred in that span of time, none of these things are actually they're not far-fetched at all, are they? They're all quite plausible. Now, of course, just for the sake of having this discussion, I put them all on this one poor family. And that's not real world. But the fact that it could happen once to any person means that you have a defect in your process. You have a problem. Anything that can happen once can and will happen again unless you change the process to prevent it. And that's why safe care and efficient care are so deeply intertwined. It isn't fast care. That's not the goal. It's waste-free care that doesn't create defects. So what to do? You can leave this portion of the talk with an emotion of despair. Because if everything I've said is resonating with you and you're feeling hopeless, that's all I've created. Or you can say, gosh, I can actually think of waste, I can identify it, and I can actually be a proponent for solving it. Now, you guys may not feel very empowered here at Erlanger or at UT College of Medicine. Those are very big places with lots of people. I invite you to feel empowered because there's a lot of work ahead, and I think we're involving more and more and more of our learners in these projects going forward, and we're seeing good results with that. But more than that, you're going to go into healthcare for the rest of your careers, and there's nothing uniquely weird about Erlanger. You're going to be running this for the rest of your time in medicine. So my hope is that, and you're not going to have enough from this talk by any means to do that, but I'm hoping there's spark enough interest to where you'd be willing to maybe take another step. And while you're here at Erlanger, there is an option of taking our Lean 101 course, which is offered by our PI team. And they do a wonderful job of going a little bit deeper into this. Again, you won't leave that with a master's degree, but you will leave with a better understanding of kind of the concept, and they have a wonderful simulation that actually looks at patient movement and all of that is pretty common stuff, and how to resort that process in really important in very good ways. So I invite you to consider taking that course. You can sign up on Erlanger online. Okay. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Sonia, who's actually one of the creators of that actual course, and she's going to talk to you about standard work. Here's water for you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bennett. I'll wrap it up, so maybe give you some time to get to your next meeting or your next patient, or whatever you have for the rest of the afternoon. So really briefly, thank you, Dr. Bennett, for the Lean 101 plug. So if you haven't heard, it's an Erlanger developed course using methodology that has been tested in other organizations and other industries and other hospitals, and we want to use some of those tools here. So if you do take the Lean 101 course, these are the topics we'll cover. So 5S, that's talking about organization. So if you remember Dr. Bennett earlier talking about motion and looking at employees, and it seems like their workstation isn't designed well and they're going from place to place to get things done. So we touch on that in 5S. We'll talk about standard work in a second. Visual management and our visual management boards and huddles is something that we discuss. The 5 Whys, we touch on that, and process flow very briefly. Okay. All right, so what is standard work? So all the variability and the variation that Dr. Bennett was talking about, we use a tool called standard work to address that. And what standard work is, it's a written document that represents the best, safest, and easiest way to do a job as we know it right now. When we develop standard work, it doesn't say that it's written in stone. As we learn more, as we do the work more, we may say we're going to go back and modify our standard work because we found a better way to do it. The advantages of standard work, it creates consistency and predictability. It preserves know-how and expertise. So if you think about tasks that you have you been asked to do a task and there's not clear documentation on how you should follow the task? That's what that does if you have standard work. It helps prevent recurrence of errors. So if you think about tasks, especially at the front line that they do every day, if you have a documented best way to do that and you always practice that when you're busy or when you're rushing, the likelihood of you making an error is reduced because you always do it the same way, which is the best practice. It helps improve staff satisfaction and productivity. So if you think about you're working in a team and you're doing the same work and you have a team member who doesn't do all the steps. So that causes dissatisfaction for you. So if all of the team is following the same standard work, your satisfaction goes up as well. And then, of course, it helps to improve patient satisfaction because they know what to expect. All of their caregivers are following the same process. Okay. So we mentioned that standard work is the documentation of the best practices. If we can, we try to have photos with it. So if we're thinking about something that happens at the front line, if we can have a diagram where they do the work, that helps. Some of us are visual learners, so showing what's expected goes a long way. We mentioned that it ensures that the work is performed the same way each time. Most importantly, so if there's an area or a process in your day that you feel like needs to be standardized, it's important that you reach out to the people that are doing that work and you develop it together. And really the point I want to make here is someone like myself from PI should not come to you and say, here's your standard work, this is what you should do. I'm not the expert in that process. I can help facilitate, I can help coach you do that, but the people who do it every day are the experts. And then, of course, it's posted visibly if you have the real estate on the wall where the processes are performed. Okay. Benefits of standard work. You have the resources and routines and safeguards in place that protect your practice of medicine. So, examples that you can relate to, laboratory results reported in an accurate or timely manner. Are your labs always available when you need them? They're always there, or sometimes you have to ask, you have to call the lab. You enter at stat because you expect that there's going to be a delay. Having outside records available prior to consults would be the benefit of implementing standard work. Medication refills ready for signing after checking for allergies. A checklist for pre-surgical authorizations and registrations. So how many times do we have to cancel cases because we haven't done the work in advance for that case to move forward? These are just a few examples. Do you guys have any examples that you'd like to share? And remember to use the mic where you have experienced some variability in our processes and you feel like it would benefit from standard work. Don't be shy. I'm sure you've probably experienced some this morning in your day. I see some smiles. No one wanting to share? Okay, great.
It's like what's already on there, but essentially getting new patients in clinic without the old records despite having requested them. Or just never getting the old records ever.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example. Somewhere we have processes that aren't optimized. So we haven't developed the standard work. We haven't developed the best process to get those records to you. And more importantly, so I shouldn't develop standard work. You can develop standard work, but then we have to educate the staff. This is our new process. It's no good to have a perfect process documented and put on the shelf. We have to educate. And then we have to take it one step further. We have to audit. So change is hard. When we implement a new process, it's going to take time for people to hardwire that. So we have to audit and follow up and give that feedback until that process is hardwired. But that's a good one. Okay, go ahead.
Ours also goes in the lab kind of area, but just if in Epic or even in medications and labs and where you type in one thing and there's 100 options and they have very different outcomes. Like for like a vaginitis panel, there's several options and they have completely different outcomes. So we all want the same thing every time, and
Absolutely.
So it's an option.
That's another good one. I should be writing these down. Opportunities for improvement, but that's another good one. Got one over there.
One issue that we face a lot on the floors are not knowing whether labs have been drawn or not, and whether or not they're in process in the lab. And we've had to spend like maybe 5-10 minutes per day just tracking down, calling the nurse, calling the lab, see whether it's in process, it's received or not. And then the lab constantly says, hey, we can't actually tell if the order's been placed because we don't have Epic, and we can't communicate and whether or not it's collected or not and where it's at.
So can you tell me the person's name that gave that example?
Sean Singh Ho.
Okay. Well, I have great news for you. There's actually a process improvement team working on that very issue. That's great. We've received feedback from providers exactly what you described. So the team is currently they're developing their process map. So what is the current process? And that's really important. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, and we don't teach this in Lean 101, but it's very important to document the current process. And why we do that is to identify the gaps. So with that process, there are a lot of gaps. Once we identify those gaps, we can start working on them. We also we talk about the Gemba in Lean 101. We've already had process improvement folks go, and not just day shift, but also also on the night shift. And when we say go into the gimbal, we go and see the work being done. So someone has been on night shift to actually watch the staff as they print those labels and see what happens. Because in a conference room, we can all say, well, we think this is what the process is. We think this is what is happening. But you actually have to go and see it for yourself to really understand how to fix it. And then the piece that you mentioned about the lab not having Epic, so they can't see. We understand that piece as well. So if you want updates on that, we can absolutely provide them. We have a forum called OpEx that meets every second Tuesday at 2. You guys are welcome to join us there if you want to hear updates about that. But if specifically if you want to, you can reach out to me or Dr. Bennett, and we can ask the PI consultant, Tracy Fettig, to include you on the meeting updates for that issue. But that one is one that affects all of you, and there's actually a process improvement consultant leading that project.
And I was thinking about the lab's experience with that same problem. You know, as they're trying to do work and they're getting call after call after call after call to stop what they're doing, to try and get the answer you want, and how hard it is for them to finish their work, which you're waiting on. So the irony of this waste is pretty impressive.
Gotcha. All right, any others? Those are all good. Okay. So I'll skip over this slide because we pretty much covered it and we're getting close to the top of the hour. But I do want to ask this question, and hopefully, Dr. Bennett, we have some folks that want to answer, or you guys just yell it out. Who do you think should have standard work? Don't be shy. You can yell it out. Ah, yes, I think I heard it. Who is that? Yes, everyone should have standard work. And so I don't want you to feel like standard work is my work as a physician will be prescriptive, because you know it's not. You know much better than I. But it's more about those things that multiple people do, like the lab process. We should have that standardized. As a provider or a leader in the organization, there are some parts of our day that are the same. If you think about, okay, I get emails every day. How am I going to incorporate that day into my day so that I don't miss any information? That's what we mean by having standard work as a leader. So those things you need to do to take care of your patients, support your team, standardizing that so that we get the best possible results. So as you can see from this table, depending on your role, the percent of your recommended work, the percent of your day that's standardized varies, and that makes sense. So people at the front line, it's not that we're saying we want mindless drones at the front line. It just means that they're doing tasks that multiple people do, and it should be standardized. The way we pass meds should be standardized. Each person should do it the same way. So that's what it means. So I don't want to give the impression that we're saying, hey, we're going to, you take off you don't need your brain. We just need the rest of the parts of you to do tasks. We don't mean that at all. It's just some of those things that are repetitive, making sure that they get done. Okay, so I'm pretty much out of time. What I will say are the slides that I'm skipping over. They're all in Lean 101. I really encourage you to sign up for those classes. Like Dr. Bennett said, you can go to EOL and sign up. One thing I do want to say, if you go right now, you're going to see classes through the rest of this fiscal year, actually through the calendar year. We're actually I'm advertising and then telling you I'm putting them on hold. So because of other initiatives in the system at this moment, we'll restart those in earnest in July. And it's just because right now the demand has been low, and we don't want you to come to a class and there are only 4 people in the class and we have to cancel it. So we'll have an advertising blitz, get the enrollment back up. But just please keep that in mind, and you'll see the flyers, the emails, you'll see it on the intranet coming soon. And we'd like for you to take it. It's really beneficial when we have a mix in the class because we can share experiences. So that's pretty good. All right, any questions? Yeah, there's the question slide. Any questions for me or for Dr. Bennett? Or if you have others, so those were really great examples of standardization that we need. If you have others, feel free to reach out to Dr. Cord, myself, or any of your leaders, and we'll get it on the project list. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.